All right. Hello, hello, hello. This is Tamika of Love Inspired Teach E, and today we are going to have a special guest. But I did want to give a little intro, remind you guys what Love Inspired Teach E is about. So we initially started as a blog, pivoted to doing podcasts, and the podcast topics are usually various topics. Really, we've done finance, we've done relationships, we've done healthcare, which is what we're going to be doing tonight. And then we also talked a little bit about spirituality. And throughout this time, we've definitely touched on topics that I think people find intriguing, but there's also ones that are like near and dear to my heart. So I'm really glad to be able to introduce Amy Johnston. She is someone who I met through another near and dear friend who you guys have heard from before, Joe Calvanico, when he was talking about his nonprofit that he works with. But he introduced me to Amy, just because he saw a lot of synergy between what I've been talking about with Love Inspired Teachy and the Firestarters podcast, and really the arena that she's going into and has she's grown herself, and that's near and dear to her heart. And so Amy not only does this work because it's something she's passionate about, but it's just entirely relevant, and she's been able to grow it. And honestly, when I first met Amy, she just had an amazing spirit. So whenever you meet someone like that, you have to spread the love, make sure that other people are aware of the good work that they're doing. So without further ado, I'm going to add Amy in so she can add anything I might have missed that's very important to what you guys need to know about her. But I always like to make sure that people know, where I'm coming from and why I felt it was important for us to talk tonight. So is there anything I didn't touch on that you feel is relevant?
Not really. Just thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I'm a social worker and a mental health clinician. So I work as a therapist and I see clients one-on-one. And then the other part of my job is really building and developing mental health programs at work. So that's what I've been working on. And I'm a mom. So we kind of bonded when we first met over the fact that we're both moms trying to figure this out, working, parenting, pandemic life.
Absolutely.
So that's a huge part of what I spend my days thinking about and dealing with. My 7-year-old and my 9-year-old.
Yeah. Well, and those ages are really fun too, I have to say. They help you think about things a little bit differently. And it's been interesting because our kids, to get into us bonding, they've basically started school in the pandemic. So we've seen how it impacts them in their world. And then when we talked about how it impacts us in our working world, it's still relevant, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my kindergartner, or my older daughter, started kindergarten right before the big Chicago public school strike. So she went to kindergarten for a few months, and then there was the strike. And then she went back for a month or two, and then the pandemic hit. And then we spent the next year and a half doing pandemic school, homeschool and everything. So it was a rough start for them.
Yeah, definitely. And that's for her, that intro to school. I didn't even really remember that the strike was right around then too. So that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, they're all back now, and I think kids are resilient. They're better than we give them credit for a lot of the time. So
yeah. And the teachers I've talked with have actually said that they think that learning curve or that deficit that happened during the pandemic, they do feel that they're going to be able to make it up now that the kids have gotten back in a rhythm. And I think a lot of people were really nervous about that.
I think so. I think the kids are catching up. I think everybody has to just be patient with them. I think the teachers are struggling more than the kids still, honestly, figuring things out again and trying to get back into the routine of what the work world looks like.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, actually. Just in my own personal observations with my kids, and last year when it was still a debate between hybrid and whether or not they were going to come back full time. And I know you also have to factor in some of the kids had IEPs, but really to piggyback that, that is the teacher's work world. you know, they've been forced to adjust. They're supposed to be the ones leading the way, and that's honestly where you really fit in. So how did you get interested though in creating those training programs and bringing it into the work world?
So to be honest, it happened almost by accident. I had worked at Lurie Children's Hospital for 6 years. So I worked in the intensive care unit, and I was dealing with like families in crisis and trauma and kids, not surviving. And a lot of my work was centered around supporting the nurses and the doctors and like the stuff that
Mm-hmm.
they were dealing with too.
Yeah.
And it was a lot, and I got completely burned out by the end of it. After 6 years, I couldn't really keep doing that work anymore. So I left and went to urban wellness because I thought I was going to have this nice, calm, quiet life as a therapist and just see some clients and sit in a
Mm-hmm.
nice chair. And I did that for like a year. And then I got kind of bored. And so I went to my boss and I was like, I'm bored. And I still want to work here, but I wonder, like, is there something else I could do also or in addition? So we
Mm-hmm.
started thinking about ideas, and that was right around the same time the pandemic hit. And so all of a sudden, so many of our clients were coming in for therapy. And whereas like the topic of therapy used to be their partner or their kids or like other stuff going on in their lives, all of a sudden work was the thing. Like people were burned out, people were thinking about quitting their jobs, people were so stressed about all the changes that were going on early COVID. And so
Mm-hmm.
between me looking for something to do and to create and our clients coming in with all this workplace stress, it just kind of organically came from there that we thought, well, why don't we start working on some workplace mental health programming? And instead of waiting for people to be burned out and ready to quit their job, we could go into workplaces and try to, lay some groundwork and do some training and education and deal with things up front. So I got to create a program, and we got to sort of fill a space that needed some support.
That's awesome. So basically, you saw a need and you were able to respond to it because it fit your interests and you needed more to do at that point, more or
Yeah,
less,
it was just
right?
sort of a perfect combination, a perfect storm in a way of, there was this struggle happening. I needed something a little bit more creative and energetic. And I'd been there. Like I had been burned out. I had been depleted. I had gone through the whole like compassion fatigue ringer. So I could relate to what it was like for people in all kinds of different organizations now going through stuff that we'd been dealing with at the hospital for years.
Yeah. And how did you find people like the workplace and the leadership to be responsive? Like I know you said during the pandemic, people's awareness was there, but what do you really think in leadership they saw, and what, as far as that heightened awareness, how were you able to leverage that?
Mm-hmm. I think it's still a struggle because I think leaders aren't sure where mental health fits into the workplace all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But especially early pandemic, it was just an opportunity for mental health to get a spotlight finally, that it was something that, everybody knows we all have mental health and we're all dealing with stressors. But up until a few years ago, it was still like, well, that's a home issue. And I go to work and I do work stuff. And we do kind of keep those two separated. And a couple of years ago, that really stopped happening. And I think leaders had no choice but to start paying attention. Like mental health just became such a huge part of the conversation. And I think
Mm-hmm.
leaders in most organizations, understandably, didn't know what to do with that. So the idea that somebody could come in and help them figure out, like, how are my people really doing? What are the issues we need to be dealing with? And then what do we do to address those issues? I think in some
Mm-hmm.
ways, folks were relieved of like, okay, we know there's a problem. We're not sure what to do about it, but here's a person and an organization that can come in and give us some support.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as like you telling people more about those services, and creating a plan, how receptive are they to you and being able to really tailor it to their needs and their
Mm-hmm.
employees?
So it varies. I mean, we've got, different types of clients, from small nonprofit organizations with, a dozen or two employees, to some law firms that have hired us that have, lots and lots and lots of people, and everywhere in between. So one thing that's cool about what we do is like we have no set like template. Everything that we
Mm-hmm.
create is for the organization that we're working with. So when we're talking with leaders, I'm really like a real human, a real mental health clinician talking to real humans in the organization, being like, what's going on for you? What do you need? What are you struggling with? What are the issues that are coming up for you? And how can we address that? So I think it's just a different approach. Like, I really want to get to know them as people. And I think that's been, people are responsive to that. I think there's still also the sense of like, well, how are we going to know if it's working? Like, what are the metrics? What are the numbers? And that's such a tough
business always wants metrics. It's one of their big things.
But one of my clients had asked me that, and I had just gotten off of a call a couple of days before with Candace Schaefer, who was previously the head of global well-being at Twitter. So she was like very gracious and gave me an hour of her time to talk me through some of the work she was doing. And I asked her that question. I'm like, what do we say about metrics? And she said, to be honest, sometimes I just tell them, like, you have to trust me on this one. I'm like, well, that's easy for you to say. You're kind of global wellness at Twitter. But I kind of use that with this client. I said, look, when it's working, you're gonna feel it. And so a few sessions later, we started out with Zoom sessions. And then as the pandemic settled a little bit, we were in our first in-person training, and the room was buzzing and everybody was in breakout groups and they were all talking about whatever the topic was. And the executive director leaned over. He's really tall and I'm very short. He leaned down to me and he's like, it's happening, isn't it? And I was like, it's happening. Like, he could feel the buzz in the room though. Like, he could feel the people in the room starting to connect in a way they hadn't been able to for a long time. So sometimes you have to like experience it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then even for you, I'm sure like seeing it happen over and over again, it creates that momentum for you to keep building those programs and just really generate even more interest and hopefully get them to tell like their spouses, their partners about what you're doing for their companies, right?
Absolutely.
And I have to say, honestly, like as we reflect on like the pandemic, technically, I haven't heard anyone say for definitively it's over, right? Like we're too afraid to say that, especially coming into the winter season or when, like flu's gone up and just different things have gone on there. But when we think about how during the pandemic, when it started, there was also a lot of like social unrest going on at that time. So how do you think that change in the environment socially? And so we postponed this. Thank you again for agreeing to that. But we postponed it because of the voting. But I feel like there was political change that had happened as well. So how much of a factor do you think that was in people's attitudes from the beginning of the pandemic to like when we were at its height and now? Like, how does that impact the work that you're doing and really what you would advise people to do as they continue to adjust? Like, we still don't 100% know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's really the theme of so many sessions, whether it's like therapy sessions with individuals or the organizational work, that uncertainty still feels like the overarching feeling. We still don't know, like, is this over? Is it going to heat back up again this winter? Socially, every time there's an election, every time there's, a new news story, every time there's a new social justice issue that comes up, everything gets shaken back up again. So I think people do feel really uncertain and unsettled. And I think that that's impacting the workplace hugely because it's not like a very bold separation between work and home anymore. Our work lives and our home lives are kind of blended and mixed in a way that we can't separate out the social issues and the pandemic from our day-to-day and our work lives and our relationships in the office. So I think as far as advice, it really is to leaders that like young people, especially in the workforce, they don't want to be asked to separate themselves into pieces. Right? Like if they're upset about things that are going on in the world, in the news, in the elections, that's part of the conversation that they want to at work. They want to hear from their bosses. They want to hear from their employers. Like, what do you think? Where do you stand on this issue? I think it's past the time where employers can say like, well, we're not weighing in on that, or that doesn't have anything to do with us, because at this stage, it's been clear the last couple of years that work and social justice and health and mental health and the political climate, like they're all connected. And I don't think there's any going back to the old way at this point.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And it's great to hear you say that, and especially in the spaces that you're in, that the awareness is there, because I feel like it was somewhat of an elephant in the room. Like people didn't want to talk about those types of things or those changes. But on the other side of it, because I know I fit more in the middle. Like when you say young people, it's so funny because I've been working out of a new office where there are a ton more young people. But then when we do like more mixers and other trainings with other offices, you can see that there is more diversity. And how do you kind of bridge that gap between those that are used to and expect and are accustomed to the employer saying that, and them finding themselves in a new space where, the young people have made it more acceptable, but we're, in this transition, like how do they manage to bring it together for everyone, not just like tailoring it to one specific group? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. So I just turned 40 and I'm a Zennial, I think it's called. Like I'm in that cusp between millennials and Gen Xers.
Yes, we bonded on that level too. So
yeah.
Welcome to the 40 Club. It's a great place to be.
Right. I feel like we don't quite fit into either of those categories. The more traditional Gen Xers or the millennials. Or geez, all my teenage clients who are Gen Z or even Gen A, I think is the newest one.
Is that the newest one? I wasn't even aware of that.
Yeah.
They got the A.
I have a teenage,
how did that happen?
Yeah, I know. I have a teenage client who's always making fun of millennials. I'm like, I don't understand. I don't get the joke. So millennials apparently are not cool anymore for Gen Zers. But I think you're not going to. I know we are not cool. I think that we are in a space where employers are trying to figure out how to make everyone happy at the same time. And you can't. Like you can't have a one size fits all policy. You can't have a one size fits all mental health program. You have to pay attention to the different needs of your different populations, and that's the same as like working with people of color, working with LGBTQ folks. Like everyone has a different life experience, a different reaction to the things going on in the world. And I think it does take time and intention and effort to tailor things so that you have different offerings and different programs and different opportunities for conversations that give a variety of options for people to choose from, right? Because you're going to have people who want to share more about their personal lives and their mental health and to have those conversations around what's happening in the world. You're going to have other people, no matter what age they are, that are more private and don't want to have those conversations at work. And both of those things have to be okay, right? That there's space for it for the people who want that. And there's also acceptance that some folks don't. I think, but leaders, they have to be open to whatever your team needs from you, right? So you have to have that flexibility.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'd say that's fair. But for those people that are just kind of gaining that ground and moving in that direction, is there any like top 3 things that they can implement or incorporate to allow for that space for different types of people to kind of feel their way in? Like, do I want to share? Do I not want to share? And I don't know if it's fair to like necessarily put a number to it, but just a starting point per se for people.
For leaders?
For leaders or for employees that like are in a space where they're not sure if it's appropriate, like they're still not believing that that's okay. You know what I mean? Or, and like I said, the younger generation, they're in a different, they have a different opportunity. They're in a different space. So I don't know that my question applies to them so much, but maybe more people like our generation or those are even older.
Yeah, something that I have a friend in Canada who's got a leadership organization, and the two of us have been collaborating on a project called Honest Conversations. And any organization could implement any organization
could that in the comments.
Yeah. a similar like project at work. It doesn't have to be something that we do. Anyone can really do this. And the idea is that once a month, there's a facilitated conversation, and it's open to anyone. And there's a topic and sort of a loose framework that we run through. So we actually have one coming up tomorrow in our like free public version of it. And tomorrow's topic is thinking outside the gratitude box. So we'll probably have between 15 and 20 folks joining us from all different types of organizations and roles. And we just lead a conversation, and we start by thinking about like the broad topic. And then we usually have some question prompts that dive in a little bit deeper, and folks go into pairs or some smaller breakout groups to really think through some of it. And then we come back together and see like, what are the common threads? What's come up for us? And it's a really nice way to start building connection and relationships, but in a container, right? It's not just like spill all your most personal information because that's what we do now. But it's more like, here's a topic that's really important and that connects people as human beings. And we're going to think about it in a way that gives you the opportunity to get to know each other in a way that feels safe and kind of contained, but is a little deeper than just the like, what did you have for dinner last night? Or where are you going on your next vacation? So like, we look at topics like we've done boundaries, dealing with failure, the idea of living and being on purpose, finding meaning in our work. So every month we have a different way to think about it, but the goal is always the same. It's the connection, and it's creating space and sort of making that container for people to just try out what it might feel like to have a conversation with people you work with about something that's a little bit more meaty than the everyday stuff. And it's voluntary, so people can say as much as they want. They can join or not join. They can go as deep as they want to, or they can just listen. So it's a nice way to give people some space to figure it out.
That's awesome. And then you said Honest Conversations, you have a public version, but then you have a private version as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that partnership that you have going on?
So we started running it as a free monthly Zoom meeting for anyone who wants to join. And it's still happening. So every third Wednesday of the month at 11 o'clock, we have a Zoom, and anyone can come. And like I said, I think we have about 40 or 50 people registered, and maybe 15 to 20 that show up each time. So you can come any month that you want to. And we've got a few folks that have been real consistent across the last 6 months. And then we always are excited to welcome new people in. And we just started doing it because we both really cared about creating space for conversations. And then it just started picking up so much steam that we decided to offer it to organizations as an internal service. So our public one, anyone can come from anywhere. There's lawyers and professors and therapists and, anyone at all who's interested. So there's a broad range of perspectives. And then separately, an organization could bring us in, or they can do it themselves if they like what we're doing and figuring it out on their own. You can do it as an internal program.
That's awesome though, because that's like an introduction for those people that want something like that in their own organization, to say, hey, and even if they want to get buy-in, get a senior leader on board and have them check it out and say, this is something that would bring value. And I think you said it's during the lunch hour as well, right?
Yeah, so it's because we have people from all over the country joining us. We do it at 11 a.m. Central Time. So that's noon Eastern time, I guess.
Eastern, yeah.
And that way it's like a morning breakfasty hour for people on the West Coast, because we've got people from all over.
Across the board. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a cool way for people to connect that wouldn't have otherwise met each other. And then exactly like you said, some folks come to try it out and see what it's like, and to decide, is this something we want to bring to our organization, to start building these conversations at work.
That's awesome and amazing. Like, I can easily see how that's grown and given people, some confidence to share more and get those feelers out again. So I think that's an awesome suggestion. As far as when I was asking you, how can people bring this in? Would you I think the fact that you're a professional and you have that experience, it gives them that in. But for those people that are not sure their organization would be open to it, is this something you would suggest people kind of spearhead on their own as well?
I think if you have a well-being committee or a wellness committee or some group of people that are dedicated to thinking about employee well-being. Sometimes it falls within the HR department, or sometimes it's within DEI, because mental health is also a diversity issue. If you've got a few folks that can kind of help make it happen, I think it's definitely something that they can spearhead on their own. We also do like a little guidebook, so that if people want like a pre-made set of 6 sessions where it's like, here's your topic, here's your prompts, like here's a framework of how you run it, just giving people a little boost so that they don't have to come up with the idea totally from scratch. But I think, it's not a therapy session, it's just a conversation. So anyone who's interested and willing to be a little bit vulnerable can lead this type of conversation.
And it's interesting that you point that out, that it's not necessarily a therapy session. Do you find that people still have like some hangups, is the only word I can think of right now, about whether it's therapy or whether it's a discussion? Is that really important to highlight, and that distinction needed in this day and age?
So I think what we do is, specifically, like when we were doing our session on failure, one of our breakouts was that we asked people in their pairs to tell the other person a story about a time that they had failed. And like, what did it feel like? What was it like to go through that experience? And so we did put some parameters on it. We said, like, pick a 5 out of 10, right? We don't want you going in there and telling somebody about a 10 out of 10 traumatic failure that's really going to trigger you, and the other person is going to feel like they have to take care of you. Like, that's not what this is about, right? So depending on the topic, we sometimes do put like a little, some boundaries on it.
Boundaries,
say,
yeah.
Like, this is, pick a 5 out of 10, pick something that you feel comfortable talking about, maybe something that's not like a giant failure from yesterday that you still haven't processed yet, but maybe something that you had some time to reflect on. So I think for the most part, people get that. But if we're worried about something being a little bit too tender, we'll just remind folks, like, this is a community space. And if somebody really has something they need to talk about, or something that's really a struggle, then it's great to have us there to be able to like have a side conversation and help support them, or give a referral, or figure out how to get folks in the right space for that.
Gotcha. And honestly, I think the first step, having that conversation, might even, like you said, if you start in the middle of the road, it might even make it easier for them to consider pursuing, the therapy path, and like the more specific, I don't know what the right term is, but like just diving deeper. I think, to your point about the honest conversations and creating that space, I know I personally have loved that. In the company I worked at previously, they put so much more energy, and DE&I is like the buzzword right now. And I think you don't hear it quite as much, but you still do. And so when you mention that it does fall under that umbrella, again, that's that window of opportunity to bring this in for your organizations. Like, we all need help at times, and this has been new to all of us. This has been unprecedented. So why aren't we thinking of other ways to, bring more people into a shared understanding, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think under the DE&I umbrella, we spend a lot of time in trainings and workshops framing this as an identity issue too, right? Like, who you are, how you identify, like how close you are to that center of power and privilege, that impacts how you experience mental health, right? Whether it's because, you have the privilege to take a mental health day when you're having a rough time and no one's going to question you about it, or whether you can find a mental health practitioner that looks like you, or speaks your language, or has the same, cultural background, whether you can afford to go to therapy, whether you've got insurance or not. Like, all of these things make a huge difference in how we experience mental health. And so a lot of what we do is like education around that your experience maybe as a leader and your employees' experience might be very different, even with both having an anxiety diagnosis, for example, because of how you look, what language you speak, where you come from, what your socioeconomic status is, what your community or family thinks about therapy as a concept. Like, they're all things that leaders really need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, and just getting them to think and consider that is a win in and of itself. So that's awesome that you guys are bringing that to their attention and making sure that they're aware of that. I love that you mentioned mental health day, because it triggered me reminding myself that I need to do a break, because I always do them during the podcast. And we've like, I didn't give Amy a set of questions. I don't always do that, but I knew she was working on some exciting things, and I had personal questions that I wanted to ask her. But I did tell her that I always remind people to like, subscribe, share, and I always want to thank people who are watching the replay, because we know that this is during happy hour. I actually was sad because I did tell Amy this, but I usually will have a drink myself. And when Joe and I talked, hey, look at you, you got it.
When you said it was happy hour, I was like, I better pour a glass of wine just in case.
I just couldn't get to it like I normally will, because especially with this topic, I think it takes the edge off too, because not everyone is always as comfortable talking about their feelings or talking about what they're experiencing at work. And I know for me, at the end of the day, I'm just like, yes, I need this. This is part of my wind down. It's allowed. We're grown-ups. So filter it in. Or find a way to build it in. And, you know, like I said, I have to build in the commercial breaks, but it's also the best time to cheers. So I'm like, gonna have to cheers in spirit with you. I think I already mentioned you can comment, subscribe, and share, but I also want to encourage people to check out the website, because in December, a couple weeks ago, I did do a webinar with, I'm sorry, not a webinar, a podcast. Yeah, trying to switch hats here. But I did a podcast about finances with Drew, and we were planning on doing more events in December. So I want people to make sure to check that out. But to get us back on track and into the flow of just talking about mental health, even at work and the trainings, there's something you mentioned that I want to touch on, but I really have to share that Amy did a TED Talk recently. So I am going to touch on that. But I did want to ask, you were saying that you guys come up with the different topics and you have prompts, but where did you guys gather those prompts? Like what helped you to create these different topics to guide those discussions?
So to be honest, Ashley and Liz are my colleagues in Canada, and they run an organization called the Wise Mind Co. And every month, a couple of weeks before the session, we get on a Zoom call and we say, what do we want to talk about this month? It's like really organic. And we also ask the people in the group to send us suggestions from what they want to talk about. So sometimes it's like, all right, we've had a lot of people saying they really want to talk about boundaries. So let's start with that. And this month, coming up to Thanksgiving and coming up to the holidays, we'd actually just come off of a few more serious topics, which are really important. But we wanted to move into the holidays with something a little bit more warm, I guess. And so we just gratitude, but we also, in our kind of brainstorming session, we really try to think about the other side of things, or like a deeper dive into things, or something that's a little bit different than just like, let's talk about being grateful, because it's been done and everybody understands gratitude as a practice. So we were just like, what do we think about gratitude? You know, how do we approach this topic? And we came up with this idea that like gratitude is not for everybody. And some people feel like a little about it. And sometimes it's hard to be grateful, especially with the world as it is right now. So we just go from there. And then we usually have like an hour-long brainstorming session where we're like, yes, we should talk about that. That's something that's going to be perfect. And we just start creating the questions. And so it's the same way when we make our guides for organizations to do it themselves. We just sit down and start talking about the topic and what we come up with and the things that light us up and get us excited. Like that's what goes in. We're like, well, if that makes us feel
process.
Yeah, we want other people to feel that way too.
And they will, because if you're interested in the topic, then they're going to see that energy. And then you guys started from that place of like, this is what we're seeing. This is what's relevant. And it makes it easier to guide that topic. So that's totally awesome. Like, I'm happy to hear that. And I was, you know, it was kind of one of those curiosity questions, but it was one of those things where anyone who creates something, like there are times when you don't know like how to keep it going after a while. So I was just wanting to see if you guys had like some magic sauce or anything behind it. But
you know what, like Our relationship is the magic sauce. Like when we get the three of us on a call, it's just, yeah, it's sort of magical. And we just start like bouncing off of each other, and I'll say something and then they're like, yes, I was just thinking that. And like, what about this? And what about that? And all of a sudden we just have more content and more material than we could ever put into an hour. So we're always like, okay, we'll save that one for the next, part two. But yeah, it's just been a really cool organic collaboration. And so far we have not run out of ideas. So it's been pretty cool.
And that's the way you want it. So knowing that, and I got a chance to talk to you a little bit as you were preparing for this, and I know you had mentioned like you get feedback as you prepare for the TED Talk, but how much of these, both what you're doing with urban wellness, with the honest conversations, with your partnership with your friends in Canada, how much of that went into the TED Talk? And tell us a little bit more about that opportunity and your topic and all of that exciting opportunity.
So I just gave this TED Talk on Saturday, so I'm very
I know.
fresh.
I was like, yes, I get to talk to her when it's fresh. So that worked out.
Excitement of it. Yeah, so early in the year, I decided to set some goals for myself as far as like marketing and developing our business and our programming. And I'm not a salesperson or a marketing professional. I'm a therapist, so I know nothing about that end of business, right? So I thought, well, what would be some cool ways to like get myself out there? So I said, I want to speak at a couple of national conferences. I want to get an article published, and I want to give a TED Talk. And those are my
goal setting.
Right?
Awesome.
Those are my goals for the year. And I hit all of them. Like all of them fell into place. So I feel like if you put it out in the universe, you just never know. I just see myself and I don't see you anymore. So I'm going to keep talking, but I hope you're still there. So TED Talk was one of my goals, and I just thought, all right, let's Google TEDx call for speakers, and the TEDx in Normal, Illinois was looking for speakers. So I sent in my application, got accepted, and got to give my speech. Oh, there you are.
I'm back. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was actually talking while you're talking. I wanted to put the focus on you while you're talking about this, but I didn't realize it made it so you couldn't hear me anymore. So sorry about that.
Okay. I was like, I think you're still there. I'm not sure. So my talk is called Work Wives Make for Better Lives. And it's just a talk about how the relationships that we develop at work are the sort of the magic secret ingredients for well-being at work. Because we work in hard jobs, and day in and day out, we show up for stuff that, especially as a social worker, at the start of my talk, I kind of say, like, when you tell someone you're a social worker and what you do, they look at you with a mix of pity and respect and confusion, and they tilt their heads. Yeah. And they say, wow, that must be such a hard job. Like, I don't know how you do it. Like, thank God we have people like you. And it's pretty much the same response every time.
Though, right?
It is. But I think people are always like, ooh, that sounds bad. And I've always really loved my jobs for the most part. And so I started thinking like, well, why? Why do I love my jobs when everyone else in the world is like, your job sounds horrible? And I'm like, but I love what I do. And it's because of the people, right? So it's like having your work wife, your person, the one, the people who really get you and understand what you do all day. And then I talked about having a real human relationship with your clients, like, having flaws and challenges and emotions, and like building relationships with clients so that like that's part of it, right? The relationship itself becomes a tool. And then having that relationship between a leader and an employee, where you've got leadership, whether you're a leader or an employee, that relationship is a space for growth, right? Where you have a leader who wants to pull you into the next version of yourself, who wants to give you opportunities. Or if you're a leader, like doing that for someone, right? Because that facilitates growth as a leader, when you can start helping other people move to the next versions of themselves. So that was, so I told a few little stories about the different relationships and different jobs I've had, and just really tried to tie that theme together, that relationship and connection and authenticity and being genuine in all of those parts of work. Like that's what keeps you in love with your job. Like when the work is hard and you feel like you want to, run away, but your work bestie comes up and gives you a coffee and a donut when you think you're going to cry. You're like, okay, they got me. Like somebody here cares about me as a person. And that makes all the difference, especially in hard times.
That, and I love that you gave an outline of it. I was excited by that outline. So we definitely need to get the link once it comes out in December so we can watch the full talk ourselves and give you love and appreciation, because I can tell you at every single job I've had, there's always been someone who's been my work husband and or my work spouse, because it doesn't, I know some of them haven't necessarily been the husband, but my partner at work.
Right. I did say in my talk, I was like, I use that work wife term very loosely. Your work wife can be any gender. You might have more than one. You could be a work pack, but it's about that reciprocal relationship. It's about that sense that like they get you.
And I wonder how many people are in that same space as you, like people hear about their job and because it's not something they could do or that a path they pursued that they can't relate to it. Like when you and I met, I've said I've always worked in sales and marketing. That's why it made sense for my consulting company to focus on that sales and marketing side, because there's a lot of people I meet who tell me, oh my God, I couldn't do that. That's not my cup of tea. But I never thought about, like for your field, and maybe it's because I have friends that are social workers. I've always had an appreciation for your job. I don't know if I did that head tilt, but I actually always have more a sense of excitement because I'm like, oh, awesome. You guys are helping the world. You know what you're doing. Like, what is your area of expertise like? And I think that's what I asked you to when we first met. I was like, tell me more about where specifically you're at. And I just really appreciate you coming on tonight and sharing like the different path you went on, and knowing that you were in the hospital space in an area where I think I know it's a higher rate of burnout there too. That's not uncommon. And not everyone always knows that they're going to navigate to a new space. And hearing just your story of not only navigating that space, making a decision for yourself, but creating something that you care about, that you were able to grow, and organically it's led you down all these other paths. So as far as your goals and the other things what other progress have you made on that list that you created for yourself this year?
So amazingly, I think I hit all of them. I spoke in New York at a global business communicators conference. I spoke in San Francisco at a conference for law firm executives. I was published in Practical Law Journal, and I was published for a physician's magazine here in Chicago. So I got my articles published. I have a couple of big conferences under my belt and a few more small ones. And then when I found out I was going to give a TEDx, I was like, a cherry on the top, right? Like how
that is so awesome. Yes, I'm so happy for you. Congratulations on hitting all those goals. And all of that is also, I know you said you're not that into sales and marketing, but your plan in and of itself was your sales and marketing, because all this is designed to build the people's awareness of the work that you're doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was our strategy, I guess, was like, okay, so I'm not a sales and marketing person, but if I could go talk to people and if I could, speak at conferences or like write an article, people are going to connect with that, right? Because what we're talking about are basic concepts that touch everybody. So
yeah,
I think, so far so good. I'm like nervous about setting my 2023 goals though, because like now that all my 22 goals happened, now there's some pressure to like repeat.
And you got to up the ante a little bit on those too. And you've done it. So it's almost like what would top that? And have you given yourself the freedom to consider that as well?
I have a couple of projects simmering that would be some really, really big workplace mental health projects. So I think those are some I'm going to write down, like put an intention down on paper with some numbers around the amount of people that we could really support in these. But I think, more of the same, but just on a bigger scale. Like I love getting in front of people and being able to talk about what I care about and watching it land, like watching people have those light bulb moments where they're like, oh, yes, I get that. Like I feel that way, or I connect with that. It's just really exciting and it's really energizing. And it's one of those like love what you do moments when if I'm on a stage and I'm having a conversation with a bunch of people and all of a sudden like it goes off and people connect. I want more of that.
Well, honestly, everything you talked about tonight, even when you shared your journey and path, it was easy to see like what excited you and how you were able to build that momentum. And I think it's just encouraging learning from you about that. And I'm hoping that with the podcast and people watching the replay, we're going to get you even more corporations involved with the training program that you're building. So why don't you tell people how they can find specific information about that, and also any of the other current projects that you have where people can join in and learn more?
Sure. So my email is amy@urbanwellnesscounseling.com. That's the easy way to get to us. So I run the program and I do a lot of the training myself. So like I said, we're a really human one-on-one kind of program and organization. So there's no apps and there's no tech involved. Like it's really me and my team supporting everyone. Our website is urbanwellnesscounseling.com. And then once you're on the page, you just look for the Wellbeing at Work tab. So because we're also a counseling practice, so we also have therapists that do all kinds of amazing work with individuals and couples and families. But my focus is the Wellbeing at Work piece. And some of the projects we've got going on right now, it's something I'm really excited about actually, that we're sort of combining our clinical therapy and the Wellbeing at Work is putting together a program for organizations where we embed a therapist in an organization. And what I mean by that is like, how often have you heard somebody be like, I should really start going to therapy, but like, I don't know how to find a therapist. I don't know what to do with insurance. Like there's wait lists. There's so much red tape. I don't want to use my EAP because it's like 5 sessions and then you never get to see them again. And I don't want my boss to know what I'm talking about, or, all these things, all the struggles and the barriers to getting into therapy. So what we're offering, I hope soon, to organizations is we'll embed a therapist where we're just available for like on demand, sign up, show up, have a therapy session. Let's say like Wellness Wednesdays from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. There's going to be an urban wellness therapist on a Zoom ready to talk to you. You just sign up for your spot and come in. And it's, totally confidential, HIPAA compliant, all those things. The organization would be covering the cost and the employee just shows up. So like no red tape, no wait lists, no insurance paperwork, just like direct support on the spot. So that's something we're pretty excited about bringing to companies this year.
Yeah, that's amazing. And actually, when we met too, I remember telling you this, like every company could basically have its own, like, the person from Billions. Why can't I think of her name? Like I had it.
No, you mean
like
yep. The only difference is we would probably be a virtual Billions.
Yeah,
and much more ethical.
Much more ethical, I would hope.
Much
there were some questionable things going on there too, where I was just like, she can really do that since it's private.
Well, and she was. And I mean, her fictional person, she was employed by the company. So there's a little, as an employee, so there's a little gray area there too. But yeah, I think so many people that aren't seeing a therapist or getting mental health support are just coming up against barriers. Like, I don't have time. By the time I get home from work, I don't want to have to do, therapy on the weekend when I'm trying to spend time with my kids. So building it into the workday is a way that employers can really show their commitment to mental health by saying, yeah, take an hour of your workday and have a conversation.
Absolutely. And it's awesome that you're with an organization and you're leading the way in making that a reality and making it easy and eliminating the excuses, not just for the employee, but for those companies that are like, how do we even go about implementing this? So that's awesome to share. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I've loved the conversation. I appreciate you letting me pick your brain and hear all about the exciting things that you've got going on. The one other thing that I typically do is I will share with people a nonprofit that I want to highlight. And I usually have, when it comes to the mental health, sorry, something just got in my throat. But when it comes to mental health talks, I'll usually bring up NHA actually. But because I know you work with different organizations and even with Lurie Children's, was there any nonprofit organization that you want to highlight tonight for people to check out and learn more?
Yeah, so we've partnered before with the Therapy Fund for Black Women and Girls as far as trying to raise
Awesome.
money to support that organization, and they're just incredible. They really they work in a lot of different ways to provide mental health services for women of color and girls, and support communities in lots of different ways, whether it's actually getting funding for women to see therapists when they don't have the money to pay themselves, or whether it's, creating a collection of therapists who are available to support women. So we've done some fundraising for them in the past, and we're going to be doing a fundraiser in February again, where they're going to be our fundraising target. So I think they're fantastic, and that would be a great place to start if people are looking for a therapy nonprofit to devote some time or energy or money to.
Yeah, awesome. That's a new one, and I love to hear about new organizations because let's face it, when it comes to the things we do for ourselves, just helping someone else, that's like giving yourself a little mental health boost as well. And there's no shame in that, and it's an easy thing that you can do to help us all have progress. You know what I mean? So
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, that's my vote. It's through the Loveland Foundation, and they run the fund. So
okay, I'm gonna put that in the comments as well. And I think I already gave you the space to share any platforms that you have things going on. And honestly, I think it's even great that they can contact you directly via email to share. And I just want to thank you again for sharing your time tonight and telling us more about the ways you've been able to make progress and impact, and giving people that safe space and that understanding that, hey, we're moving in the right direction, and that our employers are starting to get it, and there's easy ways to incorporate it all into our lives.
Yeah, 100%. Building relationships, making connections, getting to know people as human beings, like that goes a long way. So, and
And I have to
that's what
say,
your
you make it
podcast is
easy.
about.
It is, and honestly, you make it easy to talk about. Like, I don't know if it's just because I know, like, you're a fellow mom, we're in the same age group, but everything you said, I was like, oh, I don't even have to do that much talking. She's like so on point with it. She knows what direction she's going. And I love when people can see that ease, because it creates that pathway for them, or even like kind of rolls out the red carpet, like, all right, I at least know I'm not alone, you know?
100%.
So, well, thanks again, Amy. I really appreciate it. And actually, I was going to say maybe we should revisit in February to see how things are going, promote you guys' fundraising efforts, as well as the new things you've rolled out, and maybe we can get an update on those goals you set for yourself, so we can see and encourage
That's a
ourselves
deal.
to make some more some lofty
Yeah, you
goals
know what?
as
Hold me
well.
accountable, right? If I have to show up in February and tell all your listeners what my 2023 goals are, then I'll be much more likely to get them on paper.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're open to that idea, and we'll definitely chat about that again soon, okay?
Thanks, Mika. It's been great to be here.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
And everyone, don't forget, you got to like, subscribe, share, comment. And anyone who's watching the replay, don't forget that, you can watch this as many times as you'd like. And as my daughter says, ring the notification bell. I almost forgot that one. So we got to end the night on. We're ringing the notification bell, and then we're also going to cheers after this.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.